from the south abutment to Pier 1, of course, that's the Minnesota side work that'll be done first. Maybe you can step through where they go from that span 1 and where they're moving through.
Okay. After they complete span 1, they're going to move over to the Wisconsin side, and they'll start working from Pier 3 back to the south. So they'll do from Pier 3 to Pier 2. We have a little problem there first, though. We don't have Pier 2 quite complete yet, so they have to pour the pier cap. They hope to get that done, I think, later this week or maybe early next week, I think it was. They plan to get that poured. So they'll have a couple weeks once they pour that before they'll be able to set the tub girders from Pier 3 to Pier 2.
Okay.
And then once they get that Pier 2, then they'll set the girders over the river.
Okay. And while they're waiting for that cap to cure over there on the Wisconsin side, that's time that they'll continue to work on this span 1 on this Minnesota side, getting these 3 rows of tubs in over here. Okay. And then maybe the operation from putting the tub girders from Pier 2 to Pier 3 on the Wisconsin side, that's a little different than how it's being done on this span right here on the Minnesota side, correct?
A little bit, right. They're going to, I believe, pick them with the cranes and actually bolt them together up in the air. So that'll be a little bit separate than having the beam launcher and pushing them out towards Pier 1.
Pushing them out across the railroad tracks that's happening now. Yeah. Okay.
And that's part of the reason they couldn't do that is because of the railroad tracks there.
Sure. Okay. Anything else with the bolting operation for those is quite a, I remember lining this room up a month and a half ago for a whole morning of bolting class kind of to learn how to put those bolts together. Can you explain that?
There is quite a process for doing that.
You think of just putting bolts together, right?
It's a little bit different though, but yeah, so they have to obviously get the beams or the pieces aligned so the holes line up, and they usually do that with some bolts and usually what they call pins. So they drive those pins in so the holes are lined up, then they start putting bolts in. And once they get all the holes stuffed with bolts, then they have to go back and do a process called snug tightening, all those, so they get them all back to a certain torque. And then they'll come back once they're all been snug tight, they'll actually start in the center of the splice plate and work their way around and out to the edges. And they'll do that twice to make sure everything's at the same torque. And then they'll come back and do what's called a turn of the nut method to get the bolt to the right final tension.
How big are those rascals?
We got a question here. Yeah.
The bolts, I believe they're 7/8 inch bolts, so 7/8 diameter bolts, and then the length varies on the thickness of the splice plates.
And there's a lot of them on each one of those connections.
Each connection can have anywhere from 1,000 to about 1,600 bolts. So it's not a short process. It's about a day to just do the stuffing the bolts in, snug tightening, and then tension them. So it's a full day for each piece. And
and then the MnDOT inspector, they take random tests on those bolts, or is there a report on each one of them being snug tight? Is that?
We go through and just make sure that they are snug tight, kind of watch them as they're doing it. Well, they have actually, the quality manager out there making sure they're doing it right, and then we come back behind them and check them again.
So there's a quality manager on the contractor's side along with the MnDOT inspector making sure that all 1,600 of those bolts are properly tensioned and so forth.
And
okay.
We use under the bolt, or under one end of the bolt is a DTI, it's a direct tension indicator. It's got these little nubs on them, and as they get tension towards the right torque, they will have anywhere from 3 to all 5 of these little nubs crushed, and that's how we can tell that they're properly tensioned. That's one additional way to tell they're properly tensioned.
Okay. Well, now I know why right around Christmas, I think we met over there. One of our buildings was that the contractor asked us to store some bolts and material, a lot of bolts. So they needed a warehouse to store that stuff in and do their operation. So they're using a city building behind Annity's Closet for that operation. What about the tubs themselves, Mark? Maybe give us an idea on. There are a lot of different lengths and
right. They come in different pieces. Yeah, and they vary anywhere from about 46 feet to 138 feet in length. And some of those are 8'6" in depth, and then the bigger ones over the top of the piers are 13.5 feet in depth. So they do vary quite a bit.
And they vary quite a bit, and they go in a certain order, of course, because
Right.
of that variance on the tub itself to create, yeah. So that's good. The pushing operation over the railroad tracks, it looks like they set up some beams to kind of push on, or some truss. Looks like they have.
Yeah, it's kind of like a temporary truss sitting on a temporary pier.
Okay.
And it's got a roller system in there, so they set that piece on it, and they push it out, and then they do the first connection, and they push that out and do the second connection, and finally the third connection.
And then that make the last connection at that piece of tub that's on the pier itself.
Right. Yep.
And then they'll use that same truss for the next push.
Right, for the next
across.
two sections. There
Okay.
for-
So there's really no lifting or holding that end of it because of the railroad, is that correct?
Yeah,
No
once you get
crane work over the top of the
Right,
rails is,
and as it's on that launcher, it needs to be chained down to the launcher so it can't tip or fall off and onto the tracks.
okay. Oh, good. All right, that's kind of what's happening with the tub. Is there any other work besides that? You know, I know the concrete cap
Yep.
pour.
And then there is some work at Pier 2. In addition to doing the pier cap, they are inside the enclosure doing the final staining on the pier and putting on the river clearance markers, or the elevations, so you know how much depth barges and that have going up the river. And once they do that, they're going to do some backfilling inside that cofferdam, and then they'll start pulling the sheets for the cofferdam, so that pier will be done.
So basically fill in that void that was created over there to build the foundation for Pier 2. Now just gets filled back in, and the water comes up right around the pier like it'll be from here on out then, so.
Right, yep.
Okay. And then really the other type of work that we really won't get going until we got warm weather, correct? As far as getting electricians
Right.
back in and doing street lights and, you know, all of the
Curb and
work.
gutter, things
Curb and
like that.
gutter,
All
we've
the
talked
things on
about.
Third Street we need to
Trying to
get
get,
done.
trying to get stuff that we wish we got done in the fall. We'll start right away and get through that. So it's really about building main river crossing right now and tub girders, so.
For the most part, that's all
for the
that's
most
going
part.
on.
Okay. Do you have some pictures to share with us of
I
what's
do.
been going on?
So this is one of the tub pieces that's, as it's being delivered. You can see how the inside of the tub girder actually is braced instead of like most beams. The bracing's from beam to beam, whereas these are all on the internal side. It gives it kind of a cleaner look. And typically these steel bridges need to be repainted at some point, so it should make that a little bit easier too, since it's such a clean outside, a bare kind of outside.
So do they have to paint the inside of those tubs as well,
Yeah,
Mark?
it's white. It's got a different kind of paint than the outside will get.
Okay,
Yep.
and that'll be where inspectors can go in and inside of those tubs into the future to make sure they're not seeing any issues with any of those connections or rusting or?
Yep, and in fact, when they do their deck pour, the contractor will have to get inside there to take out all the false work that's kind of over those pieces as well.
Okay.
So, yep.
And there'll be a lighting system inside of the tub girders themselves for the inspectors, correct?
Right, yep.
Yep.
Here's another picture as it's being removed from the truck and pushed out towards the launcher.
What did you say the longest piece that gets shipped, Mark?
138 feet.
138 feet. Okay.
Yep, and that's in that span 3. Or, yeah, span 3 from Pier 3 to Pier 2 there.
Okay. Wisconsin side.
Yep. And this is, the contractor actually has hired a special crane company to come in and actually do this heavy lifting for them.
Okay.
And there you can see they're starting to lower the second piece to mate it up with the first, and they can start stuffing the bolt holes in that. And that's what they're doing there. You can see they're starting to put bolts in.
Okay.
And there's one of the splice plates as it's completed. So with these tub girders, there's actually 5 different locations at each connection for splice plates. You can see there's one on the top, well actually one on each top, one on each side, and then one across the
And
bottom.
one across the bottom, so, okay.
And that is the piece that goes on top of Pier 1. That's the thicker section that's probably about 13 and a half feet in depth.
So what you can see is the thickest part, which is right in the middle, that will bear right down on Pier 1,
Right
correct?
on top of Pier 1, yep. And that's as it's being brought in on the transport truck. And then it's just been taken off the truck and sitting on blocking, waiting to be moved on to the barge. Yeah, that was it.
Okay, and then talking about that a little bit, Mark, the barge is right now, they're dredging to get the barge closer to Pier 1 so they can actually set those three big pieces right on top of Pier 1.
Right.
Okay, good. Yeah, we've, while Mark's walking back up here, I'll give you, we've been meeting with, our project started on Levy Park, our Levy Park Improvement Project, and the two contractors are working together. There's been a slowdown, of course, with the weather, but our contractor that's doing work in Levy Park is coordinating with Zenith Tech to make sure they're getting their equipment and their materials in to be able to keep working as well. So it's going to be a coordination process because we got water main going in and sheet pile going in with our project. That's going to disturb that one access road that we've got getting to Pier 1. So that's something we've been working on. But like I said, the weather did slow both operations down. So we're kind of off a week there with real super cold weather last week. So anything else about the tubs that would be of interest? I know all the connections, all the bolts going in. Do the tubs themselves, you look in the inside, they've got that bracing. Is there diaphragms between the tubs themselves, or they don't actually connect at all?
So no,
they don't. So
internal.
Those 3 runs will be 3 isolated runs themselves. And then maybe you can talk a little bit about when it gets to the stage of decking, how is that deck attached to the tub girders?
Well, on top of the flanges of the beams, they will have what they call Nelson studs. So these,
like a shear stud or something like that?
It's like a tall bolt without any threads on it.
Okay.
And they get welded to the top of that flange, and then the concrete deck is bound to those studs and holds it in place.
Okay, so the studs are just running on those on the top of the flange.
Yep.
In between those flanges, they'll just be forming to pour the deck.
Right,
The connections will actually occur right at those tub flanges.
Right. Yep.
Nothing across. Okay. Okay. And that, talking about that deck pouring, I think we heard from the contractor that'll start as soon as weather allows to kind of start working on. I mean, they could start forming and get things ready, but it's something they don't want to do in super cold weather, I suppose. Yeah.
No, because they got to maintain 60 degrees in there as the concrete's curing out. So
their deck.
Want to be in warmer weather.
Okay.
Warmer than we have right now.
Yep. Got another question here.
With those pieces bolted together that long, is expansion and contraction of that much steel a problem? Does that have to be allowed for?
It is a lot.
Good question. I'll just repeat it. The question was, with all those long pieces bolted together, expansion and contraction of that steel, is that an issue, and how is it accounted for? I guess I'll let Mark
It is an
answer that.
issue, and it's accounted for by, they have expansion joints cast into the deck to allow it to move back and forth as the temperatures change.
Would they actually move on the piers any?
The joint, as the concrete and everything, it kind of contracts, that joint kind of expands and keeps everything closed. It's kind of back and forth. So.
And that's for the deck, but then the question is the steel itself, will there be movement on the pier from the tub?
Right, no, on the tub girders, I know for sure that I think 2 of them have connections where they're bolted right to the top of the pier, so they don't slide back and forth.
And I imagine there is some movement allowed for at the abutments themselves as well?
Yeah,
okay.
I believe so, yes.
Kind of over the whole length of the bridge then, on the bridge seats?
Right.
Yeah. Good question, yeah. Yeah, so anything else you want to add, Mark, as far as?
I can't think of anything.
We'll have some more pictures and maybe you're going to start to actually see something crossing the river here now.
Right.
So it's going to look like a bridge project, and we'll be excited to see that. And we've got our time-lapse camera that's zoomed in on this location, so we'll have some good footage of this actually coming across the river. So that'll be exciting. Next month we'll maybe have a little bit more. Got another question?
Will those go across one at a time all the way and then the next one? Or work three of them?
They'll do the 3 lines from south abutment to Pier 1 first, then they'll go to Pier 3 and work back to the south to Pier 2 and do all 3 lines there, and then they'll do the 3 lines over the river last.
So over the river, will they run one totally across before they do 2?
Yes.
Or do they run them in, so they'll go all the way across with one run of the?
Right, yeah,
And
because
then
that's all gonna be lifted and held into place as it's bolted.
as it's bolted. So they'll get one kind of complete and then go to the next one
Right.
across the river. Okay. Good question. Very interesting, yeah. All right, I think that's good, and we'll be back here again in March. So
Yep.
thank you. Thanks for coming too.